Flipping the Pyramid.
Rastaman a herbalist. Well, Mr. Brown, where you depend? I know exactly my rights. I'm not trying to take you for fool. It's 9 o'clock in the night. Me just a walk, me no look for no trouble in New York City. But of course, there is no problem, cause I'm a natty. Cause Rastafari know like no CIA. Cause Rastafari burn down the earth. Love and joy we are praying. Rastaman a herbalist. Mr. Brown, where you depend? I'm just smoking a spliff. But by the look in your eyes, I know things not go sweet. So 5 more Babylon come now, treating me like a terrorist. But Mr. Brown, you should know long time, say Rastaman a herbalist. Cause Rastafari know like no CIA. Cause Rastafari burn down the earth. Love and joy we are praying. ID, passport and no answer. No, you don't need no answer. ID, passport and no answer. No, you don't need no answer. ID, passport and no answer. No, you don't need no answer. ID, passport and no answer. No, you don't need no answer. ID, passport and no answer. No, you don't need no answer. ID, passport and no answer. No, you don't need no answer. ID, passport and no answer. No, you don't need no answer. ID, passport and no answer. No, you don't need no answer. ID, passport and no answer. No, you don't need no answer. ID, passport and no answer. No, you don't need no answer.
Flipping the Pyramid is a group of individuals that have come together under a common cause, truth. We aim to discover the truth about our world and the issues it faces. Floating in a sea of misinformation, outright lies, blatant propaganda, and institutionalized indoctrination, we aim to see the world as it really is, not as we are told it is by our politicians, the corporate-controlled media, the agendized academia, or the failed dogma of religious prejudice. When we look into the future, we see the darkest events from our past revisiting us. We do not believe this is a result of a natural path for humanity. We believe there is an agenda at work. This is not to say we believe in conspiracy theories. We believe that to stand any chance of changing the pattern of war, death, starvation, and financial desperation, and of having a truly free and fair world for all, without exception, we must first understand what is really taking place, who is responsible, and what the desired outcomes are. Together, we are flipping the pyramid. www.flippingthepyramid.co.uk.
And now, live from England, bringing you news and analysis that you won't find on the corporate and government mainstream media. It's the WideShut Webcast.
That was Albarossi Policia, remixed by Zembla, also known as WideShut listener Ben Warnock. So thanks for that link, Ben. Nice remix there. And good evening to everyone else. Welcome along to another episode of the WideShut Webcast on FTP Radio. That's wideshut.co.uk for my website and flippingthepyramid.co.uk for the network. As always, I'm your host, Keelan Balderson, and for the next hour or so, depending on how deep we end up going. Last week we almost went 2 hours when it's usually an hour. But for the next hour or so, I'm going to be discussing all the latest news headlines without the spin and agenda from our governments or our monopolised corporate mainstream media. Not that everything our government or everything we read in the newspapers or watch on TV is a lie, but when there are only 6 US mega corporations that control virtually everything you see on TV and in the print media that you find in the shops, and about 5 companies in the UK that control newspapers and TV news down to the local level, it's a logical conclusion that a substantial amount of alternative information and opinion is being cut out of the equation. And I hope to offer some of that alternative information and opinion each week here on this show. Not because I want to preach to you, but so you can make up your own minds on what the truth is on a subject. The more information, the more opinion, the more knowledge, the more people talk and discuss and analyse, the more rounded your worldview is going to be. And part of the process for me is doing this. If you're new to the WideShut Webcast, we first air the show Sunday at 8 PM UK time on flippingthepyramid.co.uk, and shortly after, links are posted on YouTube. We've got iTunes, we're on iTunes, the Stitcher mobile application, and we offer a standalone MP3 file for you to download as well. All of those links posted on wideshut.co.uk shortly after the live airing. Kicking things off today, we've got an update on Barroso's Bilderberg Banking Union. We had an excellent interview last week with author Chris Morris breaking down this new EU plan, which is basically for the European Union Central Bank to govern all financial institutions, all the banks for all the member states of the European Union, further centralising decision making. And our unelected Commission President of the EU, Barroso, he's unelected, we don't vote for him, half the people in this country probably don't even know who he is. He's hiding up there in Brussels in his suit having secret meetings. But the President of the EU Commission, Barroso, says we need to move, quote, to common supervisory decisions in a federation of nation states. Pretty much pushing there for a post-democratic era, and that's very much the direction we're going. Our sovereignty, our power to affect change politically, our power to make laws that govern our own country are all being taken away and replaced with centralised bureaucratic dictates by people, as I say, we've never met and certainly have never elected in a democratic fashion. Lots of info in that Chris Morris interview, so much so that I thought I'd better transcribe it and back up what he was saying with the sources. That article is entitled Barroso's Banking Union, the next step in long-planned superstate agenda, and I'll paste that link into those listening live. But really, the crux of the matter boils down to this. the plan for an EU superstate, a single currency, a quote central political authority, was all decided in the meetings of the secretive Bilderberg Club. And more importantly, it was all decided at least a year before the public were even sold on the original European Economic Community concept. That concept being just a stepping stone to what we see today. And the proof of that is in leaked minutes from the Bilderberg Club itself from the 1955 meeting. And you can all find that at that link. And basically, the public have been deceived, and we've been led along the path to today's undemocratic system. It wasn't natural evolution of politics and business. We haven't had to make decisions to give the EU more power because it makes sense to do that, but because corporatists, business leaders and politicians colluded in secret to get us to this point. So it would benefit their global corporatist ideology, i.e. one world ruled by businessmen and corrupt financiers through a corrupted global authoritarian government. And the EU is a major plank of that emerging system. Bilderberg itself is a conglomerate of European politicians and businessmen and American politicians and businessmen and powerful people from all over the world. And the great irony that was pointed out by Morris in that interview is that the economic crisis that's being used by Barroso to push Bilderberg's plans, further integration, further economic centralisation, the crisis is built into the system itself, which the same people helped put in place. The solution to the problems created by the centralisation of power is being sold to the public as further centralisation of power by the same groups who secretly centralised it in the first place. Now, I've pointed out time and time again that our loving Prime Minister David Cameron is not a Eurosceptic. If the mainstream media did their job, instead of accepting unquestioningly Cameron's PR label that he's a Eurosceptic, if they actually analysed his claim and then debunked it, we might get somewhere. The public might be more knowledgeable on this situation. Instead, just because he says he's a Eurosceptic, they reprint it as if it's a fact. He may say a few insignificant things every now and then, like, I'll make sure England's interests come first in the EU, or I'll give no more powers to the EU, but I'll give them these powers. And then a few months later he gives them more powers anyway, when everyone's forgot what he said to begin with, because everyone's so fickle. That doesn't make him a Eurosceptic, it makes him a slimy liar. Where's our vote? Where's our referendum? Where's our say on what happens to this country and what happens to us? We can't export democracy to the Middle East at the barrel of a gun, which is immoral and wrong in itself, but we can't claim to be exporting democracy around the world and setting the example when we don't actually have democracy ourselves anymore. And just to show you how Eurosceptic Cameron is, here's an update on Barroso's banking union plans. Speaking to the BBC, French Finance Minister Pierre Moscovici stated, "The UK, like us, would like, if possible, quite a swift timeline in the handing over of this regulatory power to the EU Central Bank. The UK wants it, and they want it fast." Doesn't sound like democracy to me. Despite often claiming to be a Eurosceptic, a spokesperson for David Cameron revealed the Prime Minister's enthusiasm for the agenda. Quote, "We have consistently argued that a banking union is an essential part of a single currency, and as the single currency central bank, the European Central Bank is the right organisation to take on that supervisory role for the Euro area banks." How Eurosceptic there of Cameron to fight for this thing to go through, to give the EU more centralised power. Then again, if we take the modern perversion of the term skeptic, which is really to ignore any alternative facts contrary to the government line, you see that on things such as 9/11, then he probably is a Eurosceptic. These fake skeptics that are basically skeptics of skeptics. Those supposed skeptics that can't believe anything other than the official story on 9/11. The whole James Randi crowd. If popular mechanics didn't say it, then it's not true. I thought skeptics were supposed to be skeptical of things, not, parrot the status quo as hard as possible. Real skeptics are trailblazers who see through the bullshit and aren't afraid to come to real conclusions, even if they aren't the same conclusions as government-endorsed sources. And just to wrap things up there, as Chris Morris pointed out in our interview, which you can go back and listen, the Bank for International Settlements, which is officially the central bank of central banks, is actually partly owned by central banks and private investors. So all this is doing is streamlining the central bank system so the private money masters have easier control over everything. So if you happen to be lucky enough to have a lot of savings, put it to work against them. Buy assets. Put it into physical commodities like gold and silver. Or as our next story documents, a good way to fight back against their system is to not use their system. Money is only a means of exchange of goods and services. If people decided we could just use sticks to buy things, it's just something you can use as an exchange. Why give them the power? Why give these centralized bureaucracies, these central banks, the Bank for International Settlements, the private banking system, the corporate monopolies, why give them that power? They only have that power because you decide to use their system. You don't have to. And this story out of the BBC, Bristol pound currency to boost independent traders. The euro is in trouble. The world's financial system is in turmoil. Is this the perfect time for cities to go it alone and print their own money? A group of independent traders in Bristol are launching their own currency with the backing of the council and a credit union. The Bristol pound will be printed in notes and also traded electronically. There are other local currencies in the UK, but this is the first which can be used to pay local business taxes. Kieran Mundy, the director of the Bristol pound, explained the concept behind the currency. Big companies just hoover up money from our local area, he told me. Money goes into their financial system and typically out into London and into the offshore sector. But by definition, Bristol pounds must stay in the city. Spend a tenner in a Bristol bakery and they must use it to pay their suppliers or staff. In turn, those companies will have to use the money within the local economy. We'll be driving more business to independent traders and ensuring the diversity of our city, which is one of the things people love about Bristol, Mr. Mundy said. Already more than 100 firms are signed up. A family bakery, the Tobacco Factory Theatre, the ferry company and dozens of small cafes. Even Thatcher's Cider will accept Bristol pounds. So how will it work? They'll print notes in £1, £5, £10 and £20 denominations. A Bristol pound will be worth exactly £1 sterling. People will open an account with the Bristol Credit Union, which is administering the scheme, and for every £1 sterling they deposit, they will be credited £1 Bristol pound. This money can then either be cashed or used electronically to pay bills online or even with a mobile phone. Since the money is held by the credit union, which has FSA backing, it will have the same protection as any other deposit account. The standard government scheme guarantees up to £85,000 per person. Bristolians are being challenged to help design the new notes. The organisers have already created the logo and produced security features to counter forgery. So there you have it, a localisation of the economy in Bristol. Obviously it's still tied to the system. The knack would be to eventually reject traditional pounds altogether in local businesses and only use the Bristol pound, unless that's what they are actually doing. It would help at least to break some of that monopoly that, as they say, tends to take over the high street, these big corporations with agendas, and then funnel their money to other places. Will it catch on? Is it the complete answer to the failing financial system? No, but is it, something that gets people thinking, gets people discussing the economy? Is it a step in the right direction? I think it probably is. It's encouraging to see the people doing something from the ground floor. We have this giant unequal system. We've had QE, where the government creates millions and billions in new money and gives it to the monopolies, to the banks, under this guise of creating growth in the economy. That's not what people need right now. Even if there is some growth, it's in the wrong area. It's artificial growth. It's up there somewhere where the people don't really notice it. It shouldn't be top down. We shouldn't be bailing out banks and monopolies that caused and helped cause the crisis, at the expense of our public services, for one. A more logical way, I think, of kickstarting the economy that won't put people out in the cold would be to issue new money to every citizen. Why don't the people get the bailout? Say everyone in the country was issued £10,000 of new money. That would then be spent into the economy from the ground floor and trickle its way up to where it's needed, rather than giving it to the rich and pretending it's going to trickle its way down. It's never worked yet. What makes them think it's going to work any other time? Then again, I'm being too nice. They don't want it to work. It's just about the corporatists maintaining their grip over everyone. And anything they do wrong, we pay for it. But why can't we have a people bailout? How about they just suspend tax for a couple of years, so everyone has a bit more disposable income that can go towards paying into the economy. People buy stuff. That's what the economy is. If you have more money, you buy more stuff. If you can't buy stuff now because you're broke, then if they give you money or give you a tax break, then you can buy stuff. It's quite simple. What's wrong with suspending tax for a few years? They make it out to be this important thing. Well, we're so far in debt. 4.8 trillion is the highest kind of calculation on that. 4.8 trillion in debt, which includes future public pension liabilities and things like that. All the taxation in the country only goes to the fraction of the interest on the national debt. It doesn't even have an impact anymore. Your money doesn't go anywhere. We're in the red. The red line is going up exponentially. You're just throwing money into a well. Your tax money's not funding the NHS. We're broke. So if you just suspended tax for a couple of years, it wouldn't even matter. But it would give people more money to pump into the economy and at least get the private economy back on its feet. And we can deal with this fake debt black hole another way. I mean, it's not legitimate anyway. When did we vote to have billions going to the EU? When did we vote to spend billions going to war with all these countries based on lies? It's not our debt. Maybe the politicians should be the ones that are 4.8 trillion in debt. How about that? You look at war criminal Tony Blair swanning around giving speeches for £1 million at a time. This war criminal that should be in jail, who's a millionaire, and he used public funds to go and do an illegal war. There's something wrong with that picture. Why doesn't he have a portion of the debt? Part of it's his. Why don't all the politicians that have voted for the EU over the years, why don't they fund the EU? Why doesn't it come out of their pockets if they're the ones that decided to take away our freedoms? How about they pay for it? Obviously, that's all a pipe dream and it's not going to happen. But we can point out the hypocrisy by saying these things. Of course, if you're a politician that points out the hypocrisy of the system, or exposes corruption from within, or stands up for some kind of moral value, then your job is on the line. You're kicked back into the status quo. And we've seen two instances of that this week, the self-policing of the system. First off, we saw MP Paul Flynn took to Parliament to finally express some outrage at the utterly failed occupation of Afghanistan, and for doing so, for having a different opinion, he was banned from the Commons. If politicians can't speak outside the box, then how on earth do we expect to get any change at all? And for those that missed it, here's MP Paul Flynn earlier this week talking about Afghanistan.
Paul Flynn.
The role of our brave soldiers at the moment is to act as human shields for ministers' reputation. The danger to our soldiers is being prolonged by those on that bench who have the power to stop it. Other countries have removed their soldiers from this dangerous area where they're not doing what we're doing, which is arming and training our future enemy. Isn't this very similar to the end of the First World War, when it was said that politicians lied and soldiers died, and the reality was, as it is now, that our brave soldier lions are being led by ministerial donkeys.
Order. Can I just... noted what the Honourable Gentleman has said, but can I just ask the Honourable Member for Newport West to make it clear that he's not suggesting that any minister is lying to the House of Commons? It would be helpful if he would make that clear.
No, that's precisely what I'm saying. I believe we have had lies from the minister, and I believe that our soldiers have been let down, and they can take no confidence in the abysmal performance we had today.
I'm sorry, I asked the question because I wanted clarification, but I'm afraid it is not acceptable for any honourable or right honourable member to accuse another member of lying to the House, and I must ask the honourable gentleman to withdraw that allegation.
I apologise for you, Mr. Chairman, but I have to insist on retaining my accusation of lying. That is far more important than allowing a group of people to send our soldiers to die in vain in a war in which we should withdraw and for which the country wants us to withdraw. I accept the consequences of what I'm saying.
I'm sorry to say that the honourable gentleman is ignoring the ruling of the chair, and in so doing he is behaving, whatever his motives, in a grossly disorderly manner. I must now order the honourable member to withdraw immediately from the House. I think the Secretary of State had, if memory serves me correctly, responded, but if he hadn't responded, he's now going to do so.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my response was going to be simply to note that the honourable gentleman's accusation was scandalous.
Oh, scandalous! A grossly disorderly manner. Oh, there's so much we could pull from this little incident from our honourable House of Commons. But let's start with the concept itself. You're not allowed to call another politician a liar in the Commons. Right. Does that sound like a mechanism that helps to get to the truth of matters and expose corruption? Or a mechanism that allows corruption to go ahead and puts politicians on an untouchable pedestal they shouldn't be on? And this is the thing with British politics. It's so far up its own ass, it becomes a parody of what politics should be. Do we care so much about this archaic concept of honourableness, this faux gentlemanship, that we're willing to ignore legitimate anger and complaints because they're just not gentlemanly? Well, I'm sorry, but sending young men to die in wars isn't exactly honourable and gentlemanly, is it? Let's step out of this silly little game, these overgrown apes in suits playing a game of gentlemen. And let's get to the fucking point. We've been in Afghanistan for over a decade, hundreds of British troops are dead, people's sons and daughters, and thousands of innocent Afghans have been murdered by us, and people are still dying on both sides. Whatever we're pretending to do over there, bring democracy, blah blah blah, clearly isn't working. And what we're really doing over there is absolutely immoral and sick. How is invading a country, bombing it to bits, killing thousands, then forcing the people of that country to adopt our broken concept, our warped concept of democracy, and training them to police each other under our ideals, by the barrel of a gun they shall be free, how is that in any way moral or even feasible? The Labour MP there, Paul Flynn, talks about how MPs have been lying about the war. Well, let's go back to the original lie, the reason that was sold to us for being in Afghanistan in the first place. That original lie. Bin Laden. Now, I hate to beat a dead horse here on the show, but there was, is, and forever will be zero evidence, no evidence that Bin Laden orchestrated 9/11 out of a cave in Afghanistan. None. The FBI never indicted him because there was no evidence. Now, whether you believe the ridiculous fable of Bin Laden's death or not, the reason he had to be deleted from the history books in that manner is because there is no way he could have been brought to trial. Likely because he was already dead, but also because there's no empirical evidence against him. There's no case that they could have put against him to prove that he was responsible or involved. I mean, now they've got this Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Well, he was just waterboarded a million times. As Jesse Ventura points out, you know, he's not the person you want to point to often for things, but he makes a good point. If you waterboarded anyone a million times, they're going to admit to it. Okay? But the evidence, this so-called evidence, all rests on one tape of Bin Laden allegedly admitting it was him. Just because the US State Department at the time said so, and Blair and Bush agreed, and the media repeated it, you know, over and over and over and over until we all thought, oh yeah, that's evidence then. They said so, okay. But that has been categorically debunked by Arabic-speaking experts. There is not one phrase that he says on that tape that admits anything. He's simply talking about the towers coming down, like anyone else who watched it on the news and talked about it. And that fact was shown on German television. The president of the Italian Supreme Court knows it was all a fraud. The main Japanese opposition party knows it was a fraud. But because America and Britain are in this cocoon of mainstream media propaganda that continues to peddle the same myth, we think the official explanation handed to us is all there is, when a whole world of other people know otherwise. Lie number one. There is no evidence that Bin Laden was responsible. Yet MPs probably still parrot that. And that's the reason that we were initially in there. If that's a fraud, then how does anything else have legs? It doesn't. The second point to make is, so what? Let's play devil's advocate. So what if Bin Laden and 19 of his ragtag pals carried out 9/11? That's not the same as an army directed by the state invading America, is it? There wasn't Afghan troops storming the east coast of America, running onto the beaches. Let's put it into context. Al-Qaeda was a small group of criminals. They weren't endorsed by the Afghans. Most of them were Saudi anyway. You know, that's like saying because Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, was British, America should invade England. How is it the fault of thousands of dead Afghans? How are they culpable for the alleged crimes of people they've never even met? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't hold up when you look at it. There was a poll back in 2010, I'll paste the link in. It was covered by Raw Story, and that states 92% of Afghans have never even heard of the 9/11 attacks, and we're occupying their country because of that. Imagine if our country was occupied and 92% of us didn't even know why. Let's just say China all of a sudden occupied our country, and they were telling all their people that there was this terror attack or something, and maybe a couple of Brits did something over in China, but we didn't hear about it. Does that sound fair? Does that sound right? It's not legal under the UN. There was no aggression from Afghanistan. It was a few people that may, but probably weren't, in Afghanistan at that time. And if you go back through the archives, through the history of it all, this is from The Guardian. Bush rejects Taliban offer to hand bin Laden over. President George Bush rejected, as non-negotiable, an offer by the Taliban to discuss turning over Osama bin Laden if the United States ended the bombing in Afghanistan. They were bombing before there was even any proof. Quote, if the Taliban is given evidence that Osama bin Laden is involved and the bombing campaign is stopped, we would be ready to hand him over to a third country. They didn't even provide the evidence to the people in Afghanistan that bin Laden did it. And you expect them to accept you waltzing into their country and then telling them what to do? And I'll repeat that other fact, 92% of them don't even know about the attacks. They never even heard of them. This is ludicrousness. It's crazy. And as history has showed us, when troops went waltzing in there in 2001, they didn't find bin Laden, did they? He wasn't even there. There was no Al-Qaeda left in Afghanistan. They didn't capture anybody. You know, we've got Gitmo open, but, you know, that's all a fraud. All they found, waltzing around in Tora Bora or whatever, were just a bunch of bewildered sheep herders. And obviously there were some local warlords, the Taliban or whatever, they're trying to protect their turf. I'm not saying they're good guys. I probably wouldn't buy them a pint. But why were we there? And why are we still there? It doesn't make any logical sense, even by their official explanation of it. And obviously we know the real reasons, and long-time listeners will know the real reasons, and we've gone over them many times. The invasion was already planned before 9/11. 9/11 was just the excuse to get the ball rolling. As the neocons wrote, the new Pearl Harbor is what they wanted, so they could invade and take over the Middle East. It proved very profitable for certain corporations. It fit within that overall agenda. And we could be here all day talking about that. But yes, Mr. Speaker, politicians are lying about Afghanistan. The whole damn thing is a lie. So get your head out of your arse, and instead of being a gentleman about it, do something about it. And MP Paul Flynn there also made the point that essentially what we're doing over there now in training locals to be police and to be the state forces to rule over the rest of Afghanistan and tell them, you know, the Western ideals and this is how it's going to be done now. He said that we're basically training our future enemy. Well, that's true, because these people are often turning on us. And who's to say what's going to happen in 10 more years if and when we do pull out? But I don't know how much history this Paul Flynn has read, but the skills that a lot of the militants in Afghanistan, the trained militants in Afghanistan have, the Taliban, etc., they already were trained by the West in the late 70s through the 80s for the Soviet-Afghan War. We trained our future enemy back then. Al-Qaeda was born out of the CIA Operation Cyclone. There's my phone going. But that's mainline history. There's a Wikipedia page if you want to look it up. Bin Laden was a liaison. He worked with the CIA in the 80s. And don't just believe me rambling here. Let's ask Hillary Clinton. Here's a clip from my upcoming film, Strange Bedfellows, Islamic Terrorists and the West, which you can still donate. The project is ongoing. Still trying to gather some funds for that. All the details on WideShut.co.uk. I released a trailer last week, a sort of short concept trailer that I made quite a while ago, kind of outlining. It was kind of a rough start to the film. It's obviously going to be different now, but it's just something to put out there for people to see where we're going with it. But yeah, let's ask Hillary Clinton about how we were training our future enemy back then. She admits it.
So if you think if we walked away from this, didn't give them money today, it would be worse for us from a security standpoint?
I do. We're building a relationship that just did not exist. I said in our last trip when you were with me that we had a huge trust deficit, in part because the United States had, to be fair, we had helped to create the problem we're now fighting.
How?
Because when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, we had this brilliant idea that we were going to come to Pakistan and create a force of mujahideen, equip them with Stinger missiles and everything else to go after the Soviets inside Afghanistan. And we were successful. The Soviets left Afghanistan, and then we said, great, goodbye, leaving these trained people who were fanatical in Afghanistan and Pakistan, leaving them well armed, creating a mess, frankly, that at the time we didn't really recognize. We were just so happy to see the Soviet Union fall, and we thought, okay, fine, we're okay now, everything's going to be so much better. Now you look back, the people we're fighting today, we were supporting in the fight against the Soviets.
And it gets much, much worse than that. If you note at the end of the Paul Flynn clip, Defense Secretary Philip Hammond called Flynn's comments scandalous. Oh, it's scandalous that you accuse us of lying about wars. Well, do you know what I think's scandalous, Mr. Hammond? Not only were the West working with Al-Qaeda essentially in the 80s, as Hillary Clinton admits, but the recent campaign against Gaddafi, guess what? The people NATO were working with on the ground were Islamic fundamentalists linked with Al-Qaeda. That's what's scandalous, Mr. Hammond. You working hand in glove with terrorists to break UN law in taking out a head of state. I wonder how the families of dead soldiers feel about you working with terrorists, Mr. Hammond. And this is what old boy Hammond had to say after we bombed innocent Libya into ruins with the help of terrorists. In a sickening and brazen message that highlights the extent of corruption at the helm of the Western invasion of Libya, new Defence Secretary Philip Hammond has told British corporations to pack their suitcases because reconstruction contracts and business deals are now up for the taking. Quote, Libya is a relatively wealthy country with oil reserves, and I expect there will be opportunities for British and other companies to get involved in the reconstruction of Libya, he told BBC in an interview. Yeah, let's bomb it to bits and make money rebuilding it in our image. I would expect British companies, even British sales directors, to be packing their suitcases and looking to get out to Libya and take part in the reconstruction of that country as soon as they can. Of course, when you back extremists and Islamic fundamentalists, things don't quite go smoothly, as we've seen in Libya, with warring factions and militants roaming around and Sharia law dominating parts of the country and Al-Qaeda flags waving above courthouses and American ambassadors getting blown up. Things don't go smoothly when you back the terrorists, Mr. Hammond, so thankfully the corporations didn't get to go in and rake as much money as they thought they would. But it's all about the money. Don't go anywhere, folks. We'll be back after a fitting song from Pink Floyd. Welcome back to the WideShut Webcast on FTP Radio. I'm your host, Keelan Balderson. Before Pink Floyd there, we were talking about politicians this week who have spoken up against the crimes of our government, only to be shunned for being ungentlemanly or whatever else they can throw at them. MP Paul Flynn clearly stating the truth that MPs have lied about Afghanistan since day one. why are we cutting ties with the authorities over there? Because it's not working. The police we're training, the authorities we're training, are attacking us. Admit that you lied. Admit that it's not working. Pull the troops out and let heads roll, preferably Tony Blair's. Anyway, sticking with that theme, we're going to jump over to the Daily Mail. Defence Minister Clegg axed me because I won't support attack on Iran. And rightfully so. There's no evidence Iran is anywhere near getting a nuclear weapon. The irony is that if there was any evidence, we'd already be there. They have to just keep pumping out the propaganda in hope that we somehow fall for it and there's a pretext to go in there. And I point listeners back to our February 27th episode, Debunking Iran Nuclear Threat, for all of the historical information and a breakdown of the lies and myths surrounding Iran's supposed nuclear weapons program that doesn't actually exist. But yeah, Defence Minister claims Clegg axed me because I won't support attack on Iran. A Liberal Democrat Defence Minister has claimed he was sacked to avoid a damaging coalition split over a preemptive strike on Iran. Former Armed Forces Minister Sir Nick Harvey told friends that he was fired in the reshuffle to allow Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg to sign Britain up to an Israeli-US preventative strike to take out Iran's nuclear installations. Friends of Sir Nick, who was handed a knighthood just days later, say that he could have embarrassed the Lib Dem leader by being too critical of Israel's actions if he had still been in the key Ministry of Defence post. The row broke as sources confirmed that British intelligence agents are already deeply involved in attempts to discover Iran's nuclear secrets. A futile attempt. They already know everything they need to know. We've been through this. But anyway, it is also understood that the US has asked Britain to provide ships to patrol the Straits of Hormuz, through which much of the world's oil passes. The sacking of the respected minister took MPs and army top brass by surprise. Party sources have insisted the move, which has left the Ministry of Defence staffed entirely by Tories, was due to Mr Clegg's decision to accept Lib Dem ministerial jobs in other more voter-friendly government departments. So it's all about playing the game as well. And of course Nick Clegg, the king of flip-flopping. And the MP that's making this claim that he was sacked because he wouldn't go along with an attack on Iran, he's actually started to backpedal after making that claim. Maybe someone got to him, whatever, maybe he thought, I need to keep at least some job, maybe I should buddy up to Israel and say sorry. But let's face it, if you're not down with the US and you're not down with Israel, then you're simply not part of the establishment. The Three Stooges, this Israeli Anglo-American pact. Look at people like Michael Meacher, who opposed Iraq, or look back to Paul Flynn that we talked about today. If you don't beat the war drums for the elites, then you're gone, or you're pushed aside. There is an agenda. It involves domination of the world, corporately and politically. Europe and the US already have their system in place. As the years go on in the Middle East and Africa, they are increasingly under the Anglo-American system, and it acts as the stepping stone. By going into the Middle East, it's a stepping stone closer to Russia and China. We've now got Japan and China going at it, so you can bet your bottom dollar, you can bet your bottom bond that China holds over America, that if they can, the US are going to stoke that fire between China and Japan. They're all about destabilization. It gives them more power, gives them more control. It allows them to prolong the system that they've put in place. And it's all very worrying. And we need more politicians, quite frankly, to get a backbone and speak up against these things, like an attack on Iran, or the war in Afghanistan, or everything else that's going on. The secret backing of Al-Qaeda in Syria, the completely corrupt and immoral attack on Libya. It's not good enough that only one or two people here or there are popping up. Why is that? Well, it's a combination of ignorance and fear. A lot of these MPs They just don't know the facts. They're just old fuddy-duddy men that went through the top brass colleges paid for by daddy or whatever. They're just career politicians sucking off the system for a living. We've got an MP here around where I live that's been there for like 10 years. This guy doesn't know anything. He just votes the way the Tories vote. You know, or if they do understand, then there's the herd mentality in the Commons, like we've seen, that keeps them at bay. They have to play the game. A few more headlines before we call it a night tonight. Jumping over to the Middle East Monitor. British citizens are killed by Israel, but the UK does nothing. And this obviously points out the hypocrisy of the West's support for Israel, which never seems to break. It always seems to get stronger. And it's hypocritical because Israel has actually murdered quite a lot of innocent people. Quite a lot of innocent British people over the years. But we don't really get to hear about that on the news cycles. It's not hammered home to everyone. It's kind of talked about once or twice, then brushed under the rug because it doesn't suit the political agenda. You can bet if Iran killed some British people, it'd be all over the news. It would be constantly pumped out to everyone, and it'd be used as part of the pretext to go into Iran. But this is what the article says. At the end of August, a civil suit brought by the family of Rachel Corrie came to an end, with a judge ruling that the State of Israel bore no responsibility for the death of the American activist in 2003. So who's responsible for it? Ghosts? You know? Despite the judge's decision, the case, including key testimonies, was widely believed to have shed light on Israel's grave breaches of human rights and the impunity enjoyed by its military. Rachel Corrie is not the only international to have been killed by Israel since 2000. 3 British citizens were shot dead by Israeli soldiers over a 6-month period in 2002 to 2003. Crimes that almost a decade on are a reminder of the UK government's reluctance to hold its ally to account. Then the article goes on to list all these people. Ian Hook, who was working for the United Nations, in fact, was shot dead by an Israeli sniper in November 2002. Tom Herndl, a photography student and activist, sniped in the head in 2003. James Miller, a successful and well-respected cameraman, was shot dead by an Israeli soldier while filming a documentary also in 2003. And in all of these cases, inquests and investigations have been held, and it's been found out that Israel deliberately and unlawfully killed them all, after initially in every case lying about it, saying they were either a threat or they were killed by mistake, or they thought that they were, Palestinians doing something. And it's all boiled down to, in all these inquests, that no, Israel was at fault, they were unlawfully killed, and they were deliberately killed. Yet this is hardly ever mentioned in the media, and Israel is still somehow our loving ally. Jumping over to The Guardian, hunt launched after Halliburton loses radioactive rod in Texas desert. Yes, the old Iraq war crime complicit Halliburton, once headed by Dick Cheney, who built Guantanamo Bay and were involved in the BP oil disaster, Halliburton have, quote, lost a 7-inch radioactive rod somewhere in the Texas desert. I'm personally not sure why such an evil corporation should be in charge of radioactive rods, but that's the absurd comedy of a world we live in. When the crew went to remove the AM241 source, they discovered the source transport container lock and plug were not in place and that the source was missing, the NRC said in its report into the incident. The crew returned to the well site near Pecos and searched for the source but did not find it. The radiation safety officer stated that the lock was found in the storage compartment in the back of the truck. The transport container plug was not in the container. So Halliburton losing a radioactive rod in the desert. Will heads roll for this? Probably not. There's no heads have rolled before. You know, what about the gang rape cases in Iraq with Halliburton? No one was brought to justice. When you're a giant corporation like that that's got a revolving door of politicians in the US, then you're safe. You're above the law. Moving on to our next story. If the music industry wasn't a monopoly of mediocre crap as it is, Britain's last remaining major record company, EMI, was today swallowed up by French-owned Universal as the $1.2 billion takeover was finally approved by the European Commission. So, 2 points there. The monopoly of media and entertainment continues to race on, more and more firms getting swallowed up by other ones. But also, the EU likes to meddle in business deals when it should really keep its nose out of the markets. What happened to the simple, good old trade agreements? Now we have the EU basically dictating everything. If you don't fly the EU flag but you're involved in Europe, then you get fined. Collectively, the UK is fined millions. UK businesses are fined millions every year for not flying the EU flag and using the EU logos and things like that. It's ridiculous. They want to be in every facet of our lives. And we move on to our last headline tonight. Swiss move to decriminalise marijuana possession, and this is from the Activist Post. Switzerland is on the verge of decriminalising the possession of up to 10 grams of marijuana after the lower house of Parliament Thursday agreed to align itself with the Senate's version of the legislation, according to the Swiss news portal Swiss Info. A final reading of the bill is expected to happen before the end of the fall session next week. That would bring Switzerland in line with most of its Western European neighbours, which tolerate small-time marijuana possessions. The move comes 4 years after voters rejected outright legalisation in a popular referendum. Switzerland has an estimated 500,000 pot smokers, with 10% of people in their teens and 20s saying they are regular consumers. It's 2012. I can't believe this kind of thing is still going on. All of the modern science shows pot is safe for adults. Of course, the mainstream media will come out and say, pot isn't safe for our children, when the study actually shows something more important, that it's completely safe for adults. Obviously, developing brains shouldn't be messing with substances that interfere with daily life and school and things like that, that might mess with their perceptions as they go through their formative years, or might distract them from things that they need to do and get on with. Kids don't always have the right discipline for these kind of things. But responsible adults should be left alone to do what they want in the comfort of their own living rooms. As I say, it's 2012. All of the science shows it's safe for adults. It's safe. It's fine. And it's a bloody good pain relief for those that have illnesses and diseases and so on and so forth. And I'll bet anyone listening to this, if all the Saturday night binge drinkers, all the alcoholics, all those addicted to tobacco, if they all switched over to weed, there'd be a hell of a lot less crime, there'd be a hell of a lot less death, and a hell of a lot more interesting conversation going on. And if you're worried about health, a Harvard study and other studies show that cannabis, the THC, actually helps put cancerous tumours in remission. Those worrying about smoking cannabis and lung cancer, there's no connection actually. It doesn't cause lung cancer, and you can smoke it in other ways other than through cigarettes. You can eat it, there's all sorts. And it actually helps cure cancer. You know, you can't make this stuff up. The science is out there. The propaganda is amazing against this plant. And laws against it at this point are just completely illogical, and they don't make any sense. It's illogical, it's hypocritical. Just legalise it, or just ignore it. Don't even legalise it, just let people get on with it. If you did legalise it, you could make a hell of a lot more money though. and you would take the money away from the criminal gangs, but of course our government don't want to hear it. And just before we do go, if you think because 2 cops were killed this past week that all police should now be armed and we should bring back capital punishment, then there's really no saving you, because you're the kind of person that we're just going to have to wait until you kind of slowly die off and the smart people can take over. Answering death with more death is a good way to create more death. Do you worship death? It's simple. Invent a bloody taser that can be shot like a gun. It can't be that hard. We can send people in rockets to space. We can make iPhones. Why can't we invent something that can immobilize criminals without killing them? The last thing we need is more trigger-happy police killing people and sparking riots. So much more we could have got into this week. Maybe we should extend the show permanently to maybe an hour and a half or something, so we can have guests on and get into each story, in a more in-depth manner. But anyway, I hope you've tolerated my ranting tonight, and I've given you an alternative view than what you might find on the mainstream news channels or in the newspapers. Of course, be sure to check out all the other great shows on the network at flippingthepyramid.co.uk. And if you want to support my new documentary that I mentioned earlier, Strange Bedfellows, Islamic Terrorists and the West, which goes into all this relationship that the West has had with the terrorists since the 70s, all the way till now in Syria, then you can go to WideShut.co.uk for more details, watch the trailer, read up about the project, and if you appreciate it and have got some spare change, please send it my way so we can get this thing out there. I've been Keelan Balderson, this has been the WideShut Webcast, and I will catch you here next week at 8 PM as always. Thanks everybody.
If you found the preceding information valuable, please consider buying a DVD or making a small donation of your choosing. Go to wideshut.co.uk/donate. That's wideshut.co.uk/donate. You are the resistance.
We are flipping the pyramid.
Flipping the pyramid.
Flipping the pyramid.
Flipping the pyramid. Flip the pyramid.
Flipping the pyramid.
Flip the pyramid.
We aim to see the world as it really is.
Turning that pyramid on its head.
www.flippingthepyramid.co.uk.
Flipping the pyramid. Flipping the pyramid.
Flippingthepyramid.co.uk.
Flipping the whole paradigm of that hierarchical system on its head.